It's time we have a conversation. I need to disable the comments so I can be like a journalist. Every single time they say it's time to have a dialogue, it's time to have a conversation, comment section has disabilities. But I noticed this. Director, Diversity and Inclusion, Ministry of Defense, £110,000 a year. And then when you look at soldiers, a soldier pay is 15,000 a year, well, 16,000, and an officer pay is 27,000. And this is happening under a right-wing government. So this got me thinking. You know, woke people aren't here to dismantle systems of power. They're just here to create new ones. Because in America, if you're looking at universities where almost every single leftist is complaining that the cost of tuition is too high, that it's exaggerated, and that it's very difficult to pay up the debt, when you look at where their money is going, you have diversity officers at universities making around $200,000. Like, these realpolitik commissars are everywhere in the entertainment industry, into video gaming companies, and they make a lot of money and they do almost little to no work. I speak with people from AAA gaming and they tell me it's like the developers work 11, 12 hours a day. And I'm like, well, you know, what does a diversity officer do? It's like, oh yeah, we have this plump lady over there and she works 2 or 3 hours, just sends a couple of emails here and there, organizes a diversity retreat, and after that she goes and has some wine during work hours with the HR people or with the marketing department while all the developers are slaving away in open offices. And I think this is what social justice is really about, creating these very well paid and very powerful positions within companies and institutions with people that don't have talent, with people that don't put a lot of effort, and they ruin businesses. They absolutely destroy businesses. What are social justice activists though? Like, what is a social justice warrior or a woke person? Like, how do we define it? Because every single time you talk about them, it's like, well, what do you really mean? What do you mean when you say? So the way I would define it, a social justice warrior or a woke person is almost all of the time an atheist, a left-leaning person that believes in some sort of strain of socialism, Marxism, and they separate the world in good and bad people based on various factions of inherited characteristics of individuals. These factions are most often spread on race, but they can also use religion, gender, or sexual orientation in order to put people into different categories. And these categories can be like white people versus the world, Islam versus the world, gay people versus straights, transgenders versus cis. And the factions that they like are usually the protagonists. They're always viewed in a positive light, no matter what they do. The things that they do wrong are constantly ignored, while the things that they do good are constantly exacerbated. And meanwhile, the people they don't like, which are the antagonists, they're always viewed in a bad light. And the things that they do bad are exaggerated, while the things that they do good are ignored. The only way for a person that is viewed in a bad light in order to be viewed like in a neutral light is to become an ally and do anything that the social justice activist tells them to do. So I guess like this is what I would contribute in being a woke person. And the fact that they believe this and they view the world through this lens isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is that they engage in offense archaeology. So if they don't like a person, they will go on that person's social media and dig 10, even 15 years into the past to find one thing that they consider offensive. And then they use that in order to partake into what is called cancel culture. The reason they do that is to get promotions, is to push a problematic person out of the way, is to make room for another woke person. And they do this in every single company or place they infiltrate. It's kind of funny because I remember Mr. Medicare, laughing. I believe it was at Sargon for talking too much about social justice warriors, and it's like, well, it's what was it, 2018 now? Like they're not a problem anymore. Like they've been dealt with. No one cares about them. And when you look now, they're in every single environment. You can't get away from these people. They're in gaming. They're in comic books. They're in sports, like NBA, which you would never think that it would go to the path of the broke. Right now, what are they doing? Are they playing sports? No, they're doing social justice activism because it's ingrained in the ideologies. The wonderful thing is that it doesn't even need to be a conspiracy. Most of these people don't even need to talk with each other. But the way they have been trained, and I assume this is happening usually through universities, or they've been radicalized online, their goal is to infiltrate a company and use emotional manipulation or cancel culture, usually through HR or through the diversity officers, in order to first eradicate all signs of resistance from the company. And the higher ups are also afraid because they don't want lawsuits. They don't want the people to unionize and walk away en masse. They don't want to get Me Too'd or whatever. So everyone is afraid of them. And once they manage to gain complete control of a company to the point where no one dares to speak out against them, then they shift the goal of the company from whatever the company is meant to do, like play basketball, into doing social justice activism, to the point where you need escapism from escapism now. Like you watch a TV show and it's filled with social justice porn and you just want to escape that, so you have to go to manga or anime, which is again why they're trying now to co-opt even that. There's a big problem in the market where right now the West is trying to make committees that will talk with Japanese animators who, if they want to sell their product to the West, they will have to censor the anime in order to be according to people like Funimation's taste. It's very similar to how the West sells movies in China. You have to censor them. Of course, you can still pirate the animes, but like the animators who want to get paid will have a difficult time doing that if you pirate their stuff. Different conversation, but what I'm trying to say is that they're managing to infiltrate every single institution, every single thing. And it's getting to the point where the US president is talking about cancel culture. I mean, it's becoming such a serious issue that even the American president is addressing it because it's anti-liberal, it's anti-democratic, it's anti-whatever you want. Another thing that they do is that they constantly try to bypass normal people. And cut them off from the conversation. Like they try to become gatekeepers. If you're going to notice, the movies that become popular, the games that The Last of Us become popular and whatnot, are always done without looking at what people think. It's just a group of critics, it's just a group of experts, and they talk with each other and they get to decide what is popular and what isn't. And if people start rising up and they start downvoting, if they start complaining, well, then they call that review bombing, they call that harassment, and they just shut down the conversations. And this is why a lot of people don't like them. No one likes being shut up. Most of the conversation in politics right now happen between institutions. They talk with various NGOs or various news outlets, and they really do not care what people think. Like here's an example. According to polls, more than 70% of black people want policing, but you wouldn't know that if you were to watch the news. Like the black people don't agree with defund the police or abolish the cops. They're not on board with that. But you wouldn't get that if you're just watching what comes from the mainstream media. That's just one example. So I don't know how this problem is going to be fixed, because if I were, for example, to become the CEO of Facebook tomorrow, you have so many people that have infested your company and they have like this exact ideology that you can't get rid of them easily. I mean, if you start firing them and they realize what you're doing, they're going to start talking with their friends in the media and they're going to do their best in order to slander your platform, to try to get advertisers to pull out. They're going to do walkouts. They might even get violent. It's very difficult to get rid of these people now. Maybe in 20 years, because that's how long it takes to, I guess, educate a generation. Like, people are going to be fed up with this ideology, and they're going to start, hiding their power level, going up the ranks, and then eventually not hiring them. And I happen to know a couple of people in Romania that actually do that. Like, they know what's going on in the West, and if they see someone with any type of studies on their degree, they throw it in the bin. Because they don't want that happening in their company. They don't want lawsuits. Like, that's what these people do. They're troublemakers. They get in a company and they start attacking even the competent people. They don't care if you're competent or not. They try targeting people, use offense archaeology and other emotional manipulations to make sure that eventually the company is just filled with other woke people. It's like a religion. In a way, I kind of get it. It's like Masons. Masons used to hire and promote other Masons. I guess it gotten to a point where a journalist tried to expose the Masons, and he ended up dead, and people got upset because of that. So there was this uprising against Masons, and people started fighting them. People stopped hiring them. And maybe, that's what we're going to see with this woke culture, because they are, at the end of the day, ruining the bottom line of a lot of corporations. They are damaging the finances of companies. There are companies that had absolutely no problem, like Marvel or DC. They would make a lot of money until they started hiring these people. And they created the superheroes and the characters on screen into social justice propagandists, rather than creating entertainment. And people stop reading that, because that's not what people are into. And it's the same with the NBA. I mean, the amount of privilege that you need to have to be able to go to your job and say, I'm not going to work today because we're protesting this social event, whatever that event is. If I were to do it when I worked at the hospital, I would be fired. Like, no one gets this privilege. Like, it's an insane amount of privilege to be able to go to your boss and say, yeah, we're not working today, And I bet they're still expecting to get paid, right? It's very interesting times indeed. And what's also common about these people is they're also, like, really scary. They say the same buzzwords, like they repeat the same things. It's very easy to recognize who is a woke person and who isn't. When they say stuff like, I feel unsafe, I feel so tired to have to explain. Like, they have these weird dog whistles that, you kind of, like, safe space. You kind of get what this person is, and it's interesting the way they recognize each other. So, for example, it's weird why J.K. Rowling got harassed, right? Like, she's 99.9% on board with all the social justice politics that are mainstream. Like, she wants open borders, she wants mass immigration, she votes labor, she's pro-choice. Like, every single issue she's on board with, except one. She doesn't believe that men can have uteruses. And because of that, there was a spectacular campaign of harassment against her. And you have to wonder, like, why that is. And I told someone why that is. It's because they are doing a purity test on you to see if you're one of them. And for example, if you don't believe that women have uteruses, then you may or may not be a social justice warrior, but they don't want to take the chance. And there was, like, this friend of mine who got banned from Twitter for misgendering someone, and he didn't understand why. And I told him, it's like, well, they figured out that you might be a right-winger. That's literally it. That's why they're doing these tests. Like, when they ask you, do you think it's transphobic if you refuse to have sex with a trans woman? If you say no, you failed the test. I mean, the likelihood of that event happening is significantly low. But they don't care about that. They just want to know if you're one of them. And you have to answer correctly to all of the questions that they have and be on date with all of the modern politics in order to make sure that you act like one of them if you want for them to do you services and benefits, like hiring you, promoting you, and pretty much not canceling you. So that's why you see a lot of actors from Hollywood that are saying all the correct things, because they know that if they don't, they risk getting fired. Like for them, it's their livelihood. I mean, it's surprising, right? Like almost every single Hollywood actor says the same things, has the same politics. What is the likelihood of that happening? Like, what other job do you know, let's say construction working, where everyone has the exact same issues and the same stances on every single politics? Like, it doesn't happen that way. But I remember a time when, you'd meet a guy and you'd say, hey, what party are you for? It's like, oh yeah, I'm a Republican. Oh, that's interesting. Like I'm a liberal. I didn't know that. And that was it. And then people moved on. But now it's impossible. Like the divide is so big, and they're so incompatible with everything that's not social justice, because this is an imperialist ideology. All other ideologies need to bend the knee, and social justice needs to be on top. Because otherwise their whole shtick doesn't work. It's all about power. It's all about gaining power, advancing into powerful positions, getting new classes, like new power classes created, like in this case, diversity executives or whatnot, that have almost nothing to do, and they get an obscene amount of wealth that they don't deserve, and they're destroying companies. Simple as that. Like, go get woke, go broke is a real thing. It's happening. I just wanted to get this off my chest because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm just curious, like, where is this all going to lead? Because eventually there will be a pushback. For example, Christianity used to do the same to a certain extent, especially in my country. Like, for example, some companies would have like a famous priest come there and sanctify the rooms and whatnot. There was like this connection between the church and companies. Like companies would donate to the church. It used to happen. I don't know if this happened in the West, but like here it did. But religion didn't really affect the company's bottom line. Christianity didn't make you lose money. That's the main important thing. Like sure, maybe you had Christians that would choose not to hire an atheist, or would choose to not hire someone of a different religion. But at the end of the day, you still manage to produce money. You still manage to produce wealth. With social justice activists, in their ideology, it's ingrained that money is evil in a way, because they're anti-capitalist. So how can they be productive in a capitalist system if they hate capitalism? They're not concerned about, when they go to a workplace, they're not concerned, let's say, who's the best programmer or who's the best artist. They don't care. Like if that artist or programmer that happens to be the best isn't on board with the program, they're going to go after him. And they're really effective when they unite forces and they channel their energy in order to just mess with someone. And what, like another thing that I find interesting is that when they have a common enemy, they work together very well. Like they don't care, that they have disagreements with each other. But once they've managed to destroy and eliminate all of the enemies, they start turning inwards, and then they start purity spiral. I mean, I've noticed so many threads on Reddit, and I've noticed so many forums and places where once all of the people that were the right-wingers and even the centrists were exposed, the social justice activists, they start forming into smaller groups. They start forming into, like, for example, the black women that consider to be more oppressed than the other women. And then you have the lesbian black women that consider themselves to be more oppressed than the black women. And then you have like the transgender, And these little groups start fighting with each other again. And they start cancel culturing each other. It's insane. Like if you watch it, you need to write a book about it because it's just fascinating to behold. As long as they don't have an enemy, they start turning against each other and they start doing things that they do to others to each other. It's mind-boggling. But what I want to say with this is that the problem with social justice is that there is no end goal. It's constant conflict, non-stop conflict. Just it is bizarre. The entire ideology is meant to push borders and to offend and to upset people. Now, you might think that they don't care about offense. It's like, no, if you say the N-word next to one of them, they get very offended. But if they have a show with children in drag on Netflix that they know is going to offend the majority of the population, they find that to be enriching. They find that to be an expression of art. But if you have like a joke from South Park, which is also an expression of art, they get horrified. It's so bizarre, really. I mean, the way they keep pushing the envelope, you know, like they start with reasonable things. It's like, okay, gay marriage is okay. And then they talk about, right, but transgenderism, respect the pronouns is okay. And then they move all over to drag kids and, you know, giving puberty blockers to young children and whatnot. And like they constantly push the envelope more and more and more. Like, I'm curious what will happen when these things get accepted and normalized. Kind of interesting though. Like, I'll end it with this. Been talking for a lot. In Sweden, before the virus hit, they had this study which showed that the number of girls, and it's very important, like women most affected, the number of girls that are transitioning increased by, I think it was either 300 or 3,000. I don't want to say, oh, I'll go with 300% because I'm sure like the number is with a 3 and a couple of zeros. But 300%, that's insane. So the Swedish mainstream media, which is incredibly to the left, right? They started talking and having a public dialogue, you know, just to see what the people think and trying to see what the audience thinks. And the social justice activists freaked out and they refused to join because, you know, they believe that the left-wing media is going to not give them a fair shake. If you're from Sweden, let me know how that worked out, because I've been informed that this happened, but it was before the pandemic and then I lost touch. But I know I have like a couple of Swedish people, and this was on mainstream television, on a very popular show. So I'm really curious, like, how did that end up? But anyway, right, I'm going to shut up now. Thank you for watching and have a nice morning.